Hello and welcome to Transformations Café, where we're serving light as bold as love. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Transformations Café is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation, or IFGT. We're a nonprofit, all volunteer organization, and our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world, individually and collectively. We invite you to please visit us on our website, which is theglobaltransformation.org. You can learn a lot more about us there. You can also find scads of resources and ways to join our community and support us. And if you would like to support our work and programs like this one, there's a donate button at the top of each page, and that'll coordinate you with PayPal or other payment sources if you would prefer. So, one thing that differentiates Transformations Cafe from a number of other programs is that it's live in front of an audience that is invited to participate and share in the conversation. And so, this edition of Transformations Cafe, we're actually going to explore an aspect of consciousness and the ageless wisdom that we really haven't focused on much before. So this is a nice departure from some of the other things we've done. We're going to be looking at energy and the way it's used in the healing arts, among other things. And while Reiki and yoga and many other related practices have been around for many, many years, they're yet to be integrated fully with Western healthcare systems and models. And so we want to explore this a little bit more and find out how we can use these practices to improve our own health and really our overall qualities of life. And so to help us with this tonight, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Caitlyn Adams. And I'm going to, as usual, read a brief bio. She is the owner of Heart Mind Healing and a committed guide on the journey to inner peace, presence, and alignment in truth. A practicing healing artist for 8 years, Caitlyn is a highly trained Reiki teacher practitioner in the Usui Reiki Rojo lineage and a certified yoga teacher with additional training on trauma releasing somatic practices. With 8 years working in this field, Caitlyn has worked with other healers in a variety of modalities and is a lifelong learner who loves to be presented with a new way of seeing things. Find her as Heart Mind Healing on Facebook and Instagram, and as a teacher on Insight Timer at heartmindgnv.com. Whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply curious about how healing actually works, this is a space to learn, connect, and contemplate. Caitlyn's down-to-earth style and open-hearted presence create a nurturing environment for learning and exploration. And I just want to say before we welcome Caitlyn formally that this last statement that I read, I have had the great joy and privilege to learn about this directly because Caitlyn is not only a friend, but she has been providing me with various forms of energy healing therapy and loving support for the past 2 to 3 years. And so we've had some wonderful sessions, some great conversations, and I finally got to the point where I said, okay, how'd you like to be a guest so you can share this with more people and our folks that have joined us live tonight, and then, of course, the YouTube audience. So thank you personally from the bottom of my heart, Caitlyn. It really is a pleasure to have you. And so welcome to Transformations Cafe.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken. I think we went over every single time we've talked, so it'll be interesting to see how we do on time tonight.
Yeah.
But
People
when
that
you
know me, that's something that we did easily, but yeah, I'm usually guilty of that. So
I know whenever you told me that you were hosting this cafe, I was like, this is the perfect thing for you. You've really got the vibe for that. Very easy flowing conversation. So thank you so much for inviting me on your program.
Of course, thanks for that. So, Caitlin and I talked about what we wanted to make sure we captured in this program because we do see it as a service and a resource for anyone who might find it now or in the future. And so, what we thought would be kind of a nice way to really get things started, especially since this is a conversation about energy, would be to ask you, Caitlin, to start us with a little centering and grounding meditation. So why don't we do that?
Wonderful. So thank you to everybody who's here in person and whoever's watching this recording. Wherever you are, just try and get a little comfy in your seat. Wherever you are sitting, just noticing where your body's making contact with the chair, the cushion, the floor. Noticing your natural breath. Just taking some time here. There's no need to breathe more or less. Just noticing the rhythm of your natural breath. Maybe letting your gaze soften on something out in front of you, or perhaps letting your eyelids drift closed. Hmm. Feeling your hands rest comfortably in your lap and noticing where you can invite more ease. Just checking in with sensations, with tension. Maybe finding some small movements. I often like to incorporate a sway if I'm feeling a lot of general tension. And then finding stillness again. Just checking in with what is going on internally in the moment. Noticing where you notice your breath the most. Perhaps it's the slightly cool inhale around your nostrils. Maybe the rise and fall is more noticeable in your chest or belly. With each exhale, softening more into the space, feeling your shoulders drop, letting your jaw be soft, and relaxing your eyebrows, especially the space between them. And as you feel your lower body sinking more into the supports beneath you, perhaps your next inhale has you reaching your head up towards the sky ever so slightly, lengthening through your spine as you feel your connection with the earth, as well as this upward reach towards the universe, divine connection. Perhaps bringing your palms together at your heart space, this gesture of reverence and gratitude. Thanking yourself for making time for meditation, for education and advancement. Feeling grateful for those who are sharing in the journey, both live on this call and watching it later on. And thank you again for having me here. Hmm. When you're ready, maybe wiggling your fingers and toes, blinking your eyes open if they were closed. And hopefully, we haven't lost anyone to a little nap.
All right. thought crossed my mind, but I think you did a beautiful job of just setting us in a space to just allow this to flow, which it really is kind of what some of this is about, I know. So
Oh, definitely. I'm
thank you
I'm
for
big
that.
into
That was
that.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I'm big into flow. I've been really following the cycles of the moon recently, and we're having this conversation live on the new moon, which is the beginning of the new cycle. So taking time to really center and be fully present is this is an exceptionally powerful time.
Perfect. I think, did you time this? Well, you don't have to share all the
This
secrets,
was all you.
but
I don't control the moon controls me.
well, I thought maybe we could start out um, because I think part of what we would hope to do with this is to help bring all of these practices and what you do more and more toward kind of just the everyday normal, if you will, and that they're certainly much less kind of fringe than they were maybe even 10 years ago, certainly 20. But
Definitely.
that we could help to further that movement so they're more and more accessible to people. But I thought it might be interesting if you could share just a little bit that, this wasn't necessarily always, you didn't come out of the womb or school, with this and actually had a very different background before you kind of discovered your talents, I believe. So I just thought it might be interesting if you could share a little bit about how you got to this place in your life where this is your focus.
Yeah, I was actually very resistant to alternative healing for many years. I got my bachelor's degree in accounting and I worked in bank regulation for 5 years, which is where I accumulated enough stress to have a myriad of physical symptoms. And I went to every Western doctor, and it kept coming back as there's nothing wrong with you. It's just stress. And I know many people have heard that, or even worse, it's all in your head. And so I ended up, someone had recommended I go and receive a Reiki treatment. And I was like, you know what? I'll just go prove her wrong. It's not going to help. And wouldn't you know it, it very much helped. And that's what really got me going. I was like, all right, there's something to this. And so that same individual recommended Reiki and yoga. I tried both, and I felt so much more peace. I started studying Reiki shortly after that and studied for a few years, getting up to the teaching level. And I'm still, every time I revisit my Reiki books, materials, practice, I'm always finding different levels because it's a system. There's so much to be learned. And I'm so grateful for these tools that help me to better manage my stress and to teach other people to do the same.
Yeah, that's pretty wild because and it not dissimilar to parts of my journey, and I'm many other people now that I've met, and some of whom we've had as guests that spend a portion of their lives living in a very different environment with a different set of beliefs and perceptions, and then something happens and things shift. And fortunately for me and everyone else that you've been able to help, you made the change. So I
Thank you.
can find another accountant, but
Oh,
so that's great. Um, so you were part of your answer kind of got to this, and I thought maybe you could also then um, teach us a little bit about how would you kind of describe or define these practices and how do they fit into maybe a larger picture?
definitely. So a lot of people refer to these practices as alternative healing. And recently there's been more of a movement to the term complementary healing or complementary medicine,
Nice.
because they're not meant to be an alternative. It's not either or. You don't have to pick between medication and meditation. You can find a way to interweave both. And so I still am an advocate for Western medicine in certain cases. And most of the time it's good to make sure there isn't something physical impacting and then work on the deeper healing and use them in in tandem, in harmony, instead of having to pick one or the other, because that black or white, very dualistic thinking is one of the things that we're really stepping back from as we open ourselves to all that is. So the two main systems that I was talking about are Reiki and yoga. And I feel like both of them are things where now people have heard about them and probably have some misconceptions about both. And that's been a huge change even just in the last decade. So when I started doing this work, people were like, Ray, what? What are you? I'd have never heard of that. And now most of the people I talk to, and some of this might just be the circles that I hang out in, have heard of Reiki, even if they don't necessarily know what it is. So that's a huge shift just in the last 5 to 10 years, like you were saying.
Yeah, and I can comment briefly that, in fact, we were joking about this the other day when Caitlin and I spoke to prepare a little bit for tonight that um, this either or idea of, and I love that phrase, meditation or medication, and it can be both. And a joint pain problem is what led me to seek therapy from you. And Caitlin said the other day, I think I encouraged you to have surgery before you were ready for it. So it really was. And but things work well, and I've continued, even though the acute issue was resolved largely from surgery. I continue to get care from you as well, because there's much more, which kind of leads to this next thought about um, Reiki and yoga. You said are they're kind of ways of learning more, and it's very much a holistic um, set of practices, but not just for energy and medical, but really about ourselves and the universe is what you mentioned. You want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that ties right back into what is healing in the first place.
Hmm.
And we can get so caught up in that. And of course, if you're in acute distress, when our physical body's not happy, it's very easy to go, oh, this is not healed. This needs to be healed. And then as you address sort of the loudest elements, you find out what's next, what's below that. Once you've gotten some soothing, what's the next loudest thing? And even meditation can be like that, of where it's difficult to quiet the mind. And then as you get the loudest thoughts handled, you find that there's other thoughts beneath those and other thoughts beneath those. So we're always there's always things to heal. So on the surface, yoga can look like stretching. And of course, most of our yoga classes incorporate the asana, the movement practice. The governing text of yoga, only 3 lines mention movement. Yoga is meant to be a spiritual, meditative breathwork practice, and the movement is in service of that. So the movement was sort of designed or incorporated to go, all right, how can we sit in meditation for longer? Because if you haven't stretched, meditation's not going to go great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then a lot of what we have talked about, both you and I before, as well as what we try to focus on for at least one of the areas of this program and IFDT's work overall, is teaching more about what the term we use is the ageless wisdom, although it same thing is referred to by other terms. But of course, there are relationships in what you're talking about and what you have learned and what we've shared. Do you have any thoughts about kind of how the ageless wisdom and these practices intersect?
Well, I think the relationships element that you brought up is perfect. It's really hard to work on anything in a vacuum. And so we have these higher practices, and when you're in that deep meditative moment where you're just plugged into to that pure energy, and we have human bodies and email accounts to check and different, things to do. So it's really finding that balance of being humans in this human experience while continuing to grow, learn, and evolve on the physical level and the metaphysical, spiritual, energetic level. So it's all the levels, and
Mm.
these healing systems really help with all levels by giving practices that our human selves can do to help us remember the energetic selves, because we don't have to go and find that energy or connect to it for the first time, but more so remembering that we're already connected.
Yes, and in the kind of more esoteric studies of the wisdom that I've been engaging in for a few years now, um, some of the first lessons were teaching about different types of energy,
Mhm.
and uh, kind of similar to what you were saying about thinking, being a bit of a skeptic at first, and I came from a very Western health systems orientation and empirical science orientation. So I also was skeptical about those things and now have reached very different understandings. And so it is only natural now to me to see that of course, energy would play a large role in how we feel and how we think and how we experience life, and recognizing that it's not either or of anything.
Right.
We're all integrated wholes in these various aspects of ourselves, both physical and metaphysical, as you said. So
Mm.
yeah, it's neat. So the want to really kind of just explore different things, Caitlin, and maybe if you can talk a little bit, maybe tell us about and teach us what is Reiki, since you said that most people don't know, and then maybe even comment a little bit more about what yoga is, although you did mention that, but if there's more to that too that you want to share.
So Reiki is an energetic system that originally comes to us from Japan. So that's where it's rooted. And yoga is thousands of years old. Reiki is fairly new. And that's where folks have sort of intermingled all hands-on healing as Reiki when it's truly the other way around. There's hands-on healing that has been around forever. Folks have always practiced energy work, even if it's as simple as, mom kissing a boo-boo, because that's energy work for sure. Um, Reiki's only
Mhm.
been around about 100 years. So it was
Ah,
developed in 1922 is when the founder had the system revealed to him. And most people are surprised by that we have, photographs of the founder of the system of healing. So that's one of the big differences. And again, Reiki is a system. So the words two kanji, Rei and Ki, spiritual energy. The Qi in Reiki is the same as the Qi in Tai Chi, traditional Chinese medicine. So we're working with that same element of source energy and adding the spiritual element to it. There's no, you don't have to be a specific religion to practice it or enjoy it. There are Buddhist roots, but Buddhism doesn't negate other religions by any means. So what it is a spiritual practice first and foremost. The way most people are introduced to it is through Reiki treatments. So during an energy treatment, a practitioner will guide the flow of energy either using hovering hands, maybe gentle touch, or even virtually. I did a session earlier this afternoon with someone on Zoom. Um, and during that session, we're clearing away blocks that accumulate naturally. So if you think about a free-flowing river, over time, leaves, twigs, small pebbles can fall into the river and eventually squish the flow of energy or the flow of water. And what we're doing is almost like a pressure wash, where we're going and we're clearing the little bits of debris so that the water that was already flowing can flow with greater ease. And that's something I will say one of my caveats is different lineages of Reiki have slightly different nuances. So just in case anybody disagrees, that is a-okay. This is my interpretation. Um, and so it's not that you don't have Reiki energy and I go in and give you Reiki energy. It's that you're connected. It's just a little squished, and I'm clearing away some of the debris so that you can um, feel more of that flow. And feel free to plead the fifth on this, but I imagine that it's for several days or a certain amount of time after that you're still feeling the effects. It's not short-lived.
Are you asking if that's my experience?
Yes, if you don't mind
Yeah.
being put on the spot.
No, I certainly don't mind. And I would say that that is true. There's certainly, without fail, every uh, treatment session that I had with you, often came in with a kind of more of a day-to-day uh, anxious, energy, and then left feeling very different. But I think some of the remedial effects that you're talking about can also be very subtle or that you may not
Definitely.
know. And there are things that if you hadn't told me or I hadn't noticed and asked, I might not have put the two of them together, but you would advise things like drink a lot of water. And and
Definitely.
and so let's talk about what is the energy doing and what are you doing as a practitioner with that energy beyond um, just kind of the general description that you gave, which was wonderful about just
Hmm.
kind of helping to clear away some of the blockage that and let our natural energy flow. But for instance, there might be greater thirst after a session, and there can also be increased output. And so, and some of those things, just kind of wonder what's going on, or just a real sense of like um, relaxation, but almost to the point of, okay, now I'm just not exhausted, but just really super relaxed and not really able to do much more for the rest of the day kind of thing. So what do you know a bit more about like what is happening with the energy and your as a practitioner, what are you doing? Because there's some two-way flows there too, right?
Definitely. So, I mean, the cop-out answer is it depends because every session's different because every person needs different energy. The water thing is when we're moving a lot of energy, water helps to hydrate, flush, all of that. We get, people ask if there's anything in particular they should eat or drink, and I always recommend whatever's the most nourishing for your body because everybody's got a little bit of a different thing. For most people, eating less processed foods tends to work better. Yeah. So mostly what I'm doing is getting my conscious mind and your conscious mind out of the way because the energy knows what to do. So intention is so huge. And even though I have, discussions at the beginning and there's things that you come in wanting, it's still important to set that aside with the intention of may you receive whatever it is you're meant to receive. So a lot of my personal training is in setting aside ego and conscious mind. Sounds like you've got some experience with that there. Um, so yeah, that's a big part of it. Because we have things we think we want and leaving space for the energy to flow where it's meant to. I don't recall if it's happened with your sessions, but I have had people come in and go, this is what I want to work on for sure. And then the energy just goes somewhere else. And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I didn't even realize that was there. But wow, that's what it needed, huh? And it can be so easy to get caught up in like, oh, well, I know what you need. And nah, I've probably got an idea. But it's so much more powerful to do that step aside and just allow the energy to flow. And what I'm feeling is where my hands are almost drawn like a magnet to. So I'll sometimes go, okay, it's been 5 minutes. I think I should move my hands, and I'll go to move them and they won't really move. So I'm like, all right, hanging out here longer. And being able to observe that without judgment, without questioning, and just go, yep, this is what you need. Um, I get asked often if there's a placebo element, and it's hard to separate that from the human experience. So I'm sure there is to an extent, but so far, everyone except for one person has felt something, and that one person literally crossed their arms and asked questions throughout about how it wasn't going to work. So you need to come in with some element of openness.
So this is an excellent point, and that actually reminds me again of this concept of how do we integrate better these kinds of practices. And I think sometimes the concept of a placebo effect is kind of missing the larger point because especially if you are suffering in some way, and I think something else that you can speak to maybe is that as we said before, it's not just something maybe physical going on, but there can well be emotional and mental aspects that are all related and they're manifesting as a physical symptom. At least that's what we notice. But if you get relief from that, who cares, right? I mean, bottom line is it doesn't matter if something is quote unquote real or it was imagined or placebo or whatever. It
And
will
what is real?
exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
And that goes also with your question of, well, what do we mean by healing?
Hmm.
And so I think it's important to kind of help break some of those either or types of thoughts down too, because ultimately, if you find something that's effective, which was your story and how it led you to change your life path, I think that's what's really important, and find something that works. I would suspect that part of what you might find a challenge is people that might not be genuine. And there are frauds or charlatans in every walk of life. And
Oh,
here you
yes.
are genuinely doing something. And so you want to prove that. And I think that could be maybe where people will say, well, it's just a placebo effect and it wasn't real. So anything you care to add that could maybe help people learn how to discern what to look for in a good practitioner, that could be helpful.
That's a great question, and I feel quite strongly about that. Um, so having a conversation and trusting your gut. So if you have a first conversation or first meeting with somebody, even just in this day and age, perusing their website or social media, and you get a weird feeling, don't overthink that. That might not be the person for you. Again, I mentioned there's quite a bit of variety in Reiki, a very substantial split when Reiki came to the US. A lot of the schools became quite enmeshed in New Age traditions and missed some of the practices that were more of the traditional Japanese style. So right there, we have a huge segment where you have two different Reiki practitioners who see things completely differently. And that's how we interact as humans. I love the variety. Um, Asking where people have trained. Um, Reiki has three levels of training. So level one is for personal practice. Level two would be professional. So you would want to make sure that who you're thinking of seeing is at least a Reiki level two or three. Um, One of my other red flags, and it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on this because I don't know that I've shared this with you. When someone has a million different certificates, I
Uh,
wonder, yes, there's because you want there to be, some certificates, but when someone has 15 different modalities, are they truly getting the depth in each of those modalities? Is a question I ask myself. And it depends on the person. There's some people, there's some people that seem so authentic and just, love to learn, and others who are more certificate collecting, which gets more towards spiritual materialism. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
I don't know that I've heard the term, but I can go ahead and describe it, but I got a sense of what it probably relates to.
It's people who buy all the things and don't actually live in the practices.
Uh,
And yeah, so we've seen those people that have, 15 crystal bracelets on their arm. They don't ever meditate or work with them. Um, and it's a fine line. I love the tools that we have to work with, and we have amazing tools. And remembering our tools are our tools. So sometimes there's too much external power. And I did want to touch on this as it relates to placebo effect to sort of ping back and forth. Empowerment is so important when it comes to a healing journey. Um, any sort of guru or teacher is there to guide you, and you have to do the journey. So when it comes to stepping into a healing session and going, okay, I've set aside this hour to channel healing energy, there's an element of empowerment there that right off the bat is going to have impact. I
yeah,
know I ping
I
ponged
felt
a
that
little bit over
even
there.
not no worries. This is a conversation. So the I felt that empowerment though, even in making the appointment and putting it on my calendar. Like,
Mhm.
it tells yourself, all right, this is important, and I regarded it as just as important as a doctor's appointment. It just
Definitely.
it's part of my healthcare and part of being able to function in life. You had suggested to me after again relieving the acute uh, joint issue that I found you initially through. Um, like something like just a regular chakra balancing tune-up. And having learned through my experience so far, that to me is kind of, it speaks back to this idea of credibility and what makes sense. To me, I now know it enough so that I say, yeah, that's worth it. And it's not just uh, you making something up because you like the business. This is like, okay, this is something that I think can help. And if we think a little bit more about it, doesn't it help to kind of do a reset of some kind periodically? Either if you're
Yeah.
exercising or meditating or you take a vacation or whatever it is. So this almost seems to me like it's more of a direct line to doing some of that reset.
Oh
It's
yeah, and
working briefly
I'll
with the
use
energy.
I'll use the comparison or the metaphor of the dentist. So you go in for regular cleanings from a professional. You also brush your teeth. If you brush your teeth morning and night and floss, then your regular cleanings are usually, pretty cursory. If you were to not brush your teeth at all before and between 6-month appointments, your professional cleaning is going to be a lot more rigorous. Same thing with energy. I'm glad you touched on frequency. That would be another thing to notice when it comes to other practitioners. If you approach someone for treatment and they go, "Oh, I'm going to need to see you twice a week for the next 6 months." Mm, does that feel right?
Mhm.
I tend to see people when they come with acute issues more frequently at first with the goal of spreading it out, because I don't want people to be reliant on me. I want you to have tools and come for that touch up, for that tune up, um, because getting support from somebody else is a huge part of healing too. And I've got some critiques about the self-help industry that a lot of it's very focused on, you have to figure everything out on your own. And it's, well, we've got other people that can support us on our journey, and having communities like you do here, where before we even started recording, a question about astrology came up and you right away pointed to another member and said, well, that's the astrology person. And that takes the pressure off. You don't have to know all things. You get to build this community, these resources.
Yeah, that's a great observation and a nice point. I wanted to explore a couple other things if we can. One is if we could have you talk a bit about like what a session looks like, and if you want to put me on the spot again, you can. But there are uses of other instruments, if you will, scents and sounds and other aspects. So
Oh
there's a
yeah, and that will vary greatly between practitioners as well. But I can certainly talk a little bit about that.
And then about kind of what you experience. And one of the things that I enjoyed a lot about our sessions was we would compare notes because during the sessions, you would receive impressions and I would be having experiences. And I would say in every session, there was at least one overlap. And then most of the time, there was a very high degree of overlap between what I had experienced and then what you picked up. So yeah, talk us through a little bit of that.
Yes. So again, this varies greatly depending on the practitioner. Um, I I love working with crystals, with scents, aromatherapy, just creating a nice cozy space. I do my in-person sessions on a crystal infrared mat. So it's about 40 pounds of crystals heated up with infrared heat. I found that does help with relaxation. I've noticed people relax faster with the mat than without the mat. And it really is that relaxation that helps the energy flow. And a quick little aside, some people are nervous about falling asleep during a session, and oh, will that ruin it? In my experience, oftentimes I'll feel the energy really start flowing, and then I'll hear, so falling asleep does not, I'm not trying to call you out, Ken,
Yeah.
does not impede the flow of energy. Again, it can get the conscious mind out of the way. Um, so yeah, so during a session, I get people nice and comfy. Reiki is always fully clothed. If you're working with a massage therapist who's incorporating Reiki into massage, then that would be under the massage purview. But energy work is always fully clothed. Um, I like to get my folks nice and comfy. Often I offer an eye pillow. And I even found, so I started using the eye pillow to block out light. And then I found that some gentle pressure on the eyelids actually can stimulate the vagus nerve, which governs our relaxation response. So that's another, happy accident, I guess. Um, and then I'll get myself centered, similar to the way we started our conversation today, of being present here, breathing, really feeling into that flow of energy. And then I'll use hovering hand positions, to move over different points on the body. So I'll, depending on where I feel called, spend more and less time. And the term we use, especially in training, is sensation because it's different. Um, it's different. So most of the time, I would say a good 98% of the time, I feel heat and pulsing. And that's what I'm feeling for. And once I find an area where I feel that, I stay until it shifts. And so sometimes that will be sort of a lessening of sensation that lets me know it's time to move on. Sometimes it gets more intense before it gets less. But the sensations can change. A few months ago, for the first time, my palms got itchy. I'd never
Hmm.
had that before. I didn't know palms could get itchy. Um, but I was like, all right, let's roll with it. Um, some people will see and receive messages um, that sometimes will come through for me. I am more of a feeler. So given that I'm pairing this with yoga, I do some other somatic practices. And so I'm feeling and sticking with what I'm feeling versus seeing. Sometimes images and metaphors will come through, and when they do, I of course share them. Um, that can be a big difference with practitioners. I know some Reiki practitioners will work with clear spirit guides where they'll call on someone particular to come in and support a session or receive channeled messages. It depends on what gifts and practices they're incorporating within the session. So,
Thank you. That just was reminding me as you were speaking too of like some of the experiences that I had, and I was thinking, well, before I mention that, when you start not the prelude with there, you would often like light some Palo Santo for some
mhm.
cleansing smoke and aroma. You'd have some oils or whatnot. But once you actually started working with the energy, is that so? Are you as the practitioner, are you introducing an energy and how is there a how does that work? Is there a flow that you're like beginning to start and helping to clear out, or are you sensing what's going on and then just being an energy channel? What's going on there?
So this is where we're sort of within the limitations of language.
Okay,
And at
great.
different levels, it's discussed different ways. So oftentimes the first introduction is of like a channel where there is energy that is not my own, that is flowing through me to you. Um, that helps us get past the hurdle of me thinking I need to give my energy to you and then go and get my energy back, because that would be exhausting and draining. And anytime it feels like that's happening, a reminder that this is unlimited universal energy. Um, that can be another nuance. There are some practices, uh, at least some schools of traditional Chinese medicine, that is what they're doing. They're giving you their qi and then rebuilding it afterwards with practices like qigong. So my understanding is that unlimited universal energy, we're flowing it. When we get further along, and this is more of a study understanding, I know you've got a fairly advanced, evolved group. Um, it's remembering that there is no Caitlyn, there is no Ken, and letting it be versus controlling a flow. Yeah.
Right. So then thanks for that reference because we have had many conversations on this program with people like the guest a couple of months ago, Alyssa Friedman, uh, Michael Mason recently, next month's guest, Philip Wade, who talk about the boundless or the infinite silence. And when you get the persona completely out of the way, and then you are much more experiencing that as your um, essential self, I guess, is a way to put it. Um, Not to diminish those aspects of our human persona, because that's part of it's why we're
Oh,
here
yeah.
to have that experience and integrate the with the whole self. So, at least
And
that's my
that's
understanding so
yeah.
far.
Definitely. And I mean, that's why you would see me versus someone else, because it's the same Reiki energy. We're putting our own human flair on it.
Yeah,
And that's not a bad thing. I feel like we've gotten to a space where people are like, ugh, human self. Well, that's what we're here to learn and play in.
yeah, exactly. Right. And that too, I think remembering that, for lack of a better term in this moment, it's also what's divine. It's
Yes.
sacred too. So
Mhm.
um, I just wanted to share one other thing that might help other people kind of understand what the
Mhm.
experience is like and how this energy flows. So thank you for describing that. And I think that's awesome that you're remembering there's infinite energy and it's not yours or mine. And, it's establishing that flow. There were many times where I would have some rush sensation, some movement which would just best be with the limitations of language described as energy moving.
Mhm.
And in that next moment, I would hear you do something, either a significant exhale, or there are times where you might flick your hands or your fingers to dispel that. And so you then sense that energy that flowed out of me kind of.
Mhm. I mean, energy flows like the breath. So we're constantly all day, all night, inhaling new, exhaling old, and that's how we flow. Every physical system we have flows like that. Respiratory, digestive, all of it is bringing in the new and releasing sort of the waste. So although it is this connection to unending energy, infinite energy, there is an element of what's in the human body that doesn't need to be there anymore. And I, what makes sense to me is energy sort of flowing, again, limitations of language, in through the crown and out through the feet. And
Mhm.
so where I tend to do most of my like clearing and a lot of that I do by the breath. So I've had people comment, oh, you breathe pretty loud. And I'm like, well, we're releasing a lot of stuff. Um, and that's really what I feel mostly from the hips along the legs to the feet. And oftentimes when I'm around someone's feet, I'll be visualizing, inhaling, pulling anything that's not meant to be there, and exhaling, sending it right down into the earth. Because that's another sticking point where new practitioners are often nervous. Am I going to pick up on things? Like you mentioned a joint problem. Do I want your joint problem? No, I do not. um, I don't need it. So there's a world in which you can release it and I don't take it. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be that, handing it off. I There's a great tree metaphor. Trees give off oxygen as a waste product. And if trees held on to it and they're like, oh, like this is this gross thing, we don't want to release this toxic chemical into the world, we'd be in trouble. And when we're releasing things, we're not sending that exact same thing to somebody else because it gets recycled and recalibrated in the universe. So by
Mhm.
releasing joint pain, we aren't sending joint pain to somebody else. We don't know how it's going to be transmuted. That's beyond our comprehension right now. Just like the trees don't know how the oxygen is going to be inhaled by us. Except trees are brilliant, so they probably do know on some level.
uh, Kudos to the trees. So,
Yeah. So I mean that's a very common thing I find with new folks that they're and again we get caught up in the ego and the I and we're like, "Oh, well this is my thing. I can't give you my thing, then you'll have my thing." Doesn't need to be anyone's thing. Can we soften that?
well, and that is a great bridge to how this fits with the wisdom and this shifting that we as a change making community and change makers community and IFGT are moving, helping move humanity in what ways we can toward this tipping point where things would shift. And a sign of that would be a shift of this possessiveness kind of and attachment kind of things. And I want to talk a little bit more about attachment. And one of the things that I think we could also help share now is we're recording this in late June of 2025. And right now, there seems to be massive amounts of change and unrest and uncertainty. But I think that it's possible that people might watch this in a different time in the future and say, well, we've got our flavors of that now too. So I think we can provide some help and talk about not necessarily the specifics of current events, although if you want to use examples, we can, but it feels to me, at least, like it is increasingly challenging, despite having gathered lots of knowledge and experiences, to not be overwhelmed by some of those things that really can set us into old patterns of fear and worry and anxiousness and dis-ease and leading to disease. And so, what are some thoughts you have about how we might balance that out?
So many thoughts.
Please,
It's
we have
definitely a
time.
balance. Definitely a balance. I mean, one of the big balances is between staying informed and doom scrolling. If you're taking in huge amounts of content, our nervous systems weren't designed for that. I mean, the computers that fit in the palm of our hand, screens that fit in the palm of our hand are a very new invention. Um, and we used to have a break from things. I actually heard a great there's a great book, Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, and this journalist goes into our attention spans and how now, our news bites are so quick and we don't have all the information. And he was comparing, back in the day when you'd get a newspaper the next day when the story had been solved for the most part, where now we're getting breaking news as it happens, incorrect information that then is adjusted later. And that's very confusing and dysregulating, or it can be. So, how do we find our center and tap into, some semblance of safety? Another big opinion I have is aren't when we're experiencing anxiety in a dangerous situation or fear in a dangerous situation, the nervous system is not malfunctioning. The nervous system is doing what it's intended to do, warn us that there's danger. Is it in imminent danger? Maybe, maybe not. Right now, a lot of that depends on where you are in the world, unfortunately.
Um, so aside from not doom scrolling or limiting our exposure to the never ending now availability of quote unquote news and
Hmm.
information and then now the increasing challenge of validating and verifying the information that we're getting. So in addition to really kind of dialing back on that, what are some other things that we can do kind of to regain a perspective when we get caught? Because those can be really powerful experiences. So, Ed, what are some things that you may be doing to kind of keep yourself centered? And I know you recently made a big change in your life
Hmm.
to do that. So maybe, what are some other thoughts you could share?
I mean, meditating and grounding. And you had mentioned the chakras earlier and having our energy centers in balance. I really try to remind people that once you're in balance, we don't stay in balance. As we
Uh,
embark on our healing journey, our wobbles tend to be less. And so most people find healing through whatever modality when they're really in distress. So thinking of um, one of the metaphors I use when I'm teaching Reiki are the Weeble Wobble toys. So like the toys with the weighted base that will go from side to side, but will always come back to center. That's what we're going for. This reminder that you don't have to stay rigid here in the center and, oh no, the world is ending if you're over here. It's a reminder that you can get knocked to the side and you have these practices, this grounding to bring you back to the center. Um, and that can be some of that softening attachment of what does it look like to be in balance every day? Um, is that actually attainable? The energy required for each day is different.
mm,
So if you have a day when you're on vacation and going out to eat and hanging out on the beach, that's a different day than a day where you're editing and reaching out to prospective folks for the show. And
mm,
if your energy is in line with one of those days, but on the other day, that's going to feel out of alignment. And we have, these things seasonally as well. So, is 70 degrees warm or cool? Depends. In the winter, when you're coming in from 32 degrees, 70 is warm. This time of year in Florida, late June in Florida, 70 is pretty cool. And so again, we get these comparisons and getting to know yourself, finding your ways to regulate as much as you're able to, um, and then also turning it into compassionate action.
uh,
So, what's within your control? What are you able to do? Um,
I think we
and
just think that's why I was smiling and
uh,
chuckled a little bit because the word compassion came to my mind about 3 nanoseconds before you said it. So just
we got this. Um, yeah. So I mean, there is an element. I follow some really great yogis online because yoga is not this, love and light only thing that it's been sort of molded into. A lot of throughout history, activists have practiced yoga to improve their activism. Yoga, some of the core tenets are demanding non-harm. How do we actively practice non-harm? And of course, it's our own actions, but also standing by and watching others commit harm isn't really in the spirit of non-harm. So there's all of these different elements. Um, and I mean the comparison is interesting as you get into ways people have used meditation for chaotic situations. Because of course, if we're in a retreat setting or in, a really lovely studio space, it can be easy to find that center. There's I've recommended more books than I expected to. I apologize. I believe
no
it's
need.
that bird has my wings by J. Jarvis, begins with an M, and it's about a man on death row finding Buddhist meditation and meditating while in a maximum security prison. That's a very different scenario. Um, and he talks a lot about trying to find that center when it's just chaos.
Shirley did ask a question. She wanted to know if you recommend a specific way to breathe while doing yoga.
Oh, so the breath is even more a practice of yoga than the asana, the movements. So there's so many different practices. There's a ton of different types of breath work for yoga. For those starting out, I say just breathe normally and naturally. If you're in a class situation or watching a video where the cues an instructor is giving you is like, I can't breathe like this. This sucks. I'm not going to do it anymore. Breathe naturally. It's not that big a deal. In most cases, synchronizing your breath with your movement can be very helpful. And that can be as simple as, inhaling your arms up, exhaling your arms down. Um, Exhaling as you fold, inhaling as you rise. But of course, prioritizing a comfortable breath at first for a beginner. And then so pranayama is the Sanskrit term for breath work. So if you're interested in that, that would be a good starting point for research. But yes, so many different styles of yoga. Very good question. We could literally spend a whole hour on it.
And we receive thanks for your answer. So I think you at least got enough information shared. Thank you,
Oh,
Kate,
good.
for that. Um, you were talking about the weeble wobbles, and uh, in a previous conversation we had a few weeks ago, kind of also how you can see this in nature with trees again, and how they don't stand rigid in the wind, but they are built to bend, if you will. And I
Yes.
think that those are important, maybe uh, maps to guide us back to also remembering that, as again our recent guest Alyssa Friedman mentioned in the title of her book, there's always more, and there
Mhm.
isn't. We don't find destinations, meaning that you are always going to be feeling balanced and centered and grounded, and it's beyond okay to have those times when we do feel like we've been pushed to
Mhm.
one out of balance. Um, and then finding ways to find our way back without feeling like uh, there's something wrong or something wrong with us.
Yeah. And I
Right?
think acknowledging that is a big first step. Acknowledging that we're not, amazing all of the time is such an important first step. Um, because again, we're in the age of social media, a lot of people are putting the shiny facade out there.
Yeah,
And so remembering that we're seeing other people's curated highlight reels, um, and the human experience is vast and changing. Yeah.
yeah. Um, there's other Well, there's a couple other things you had at your studio and your store, um, that I thought it might be good also to talk a little about. So, one is that you carried a number of uh, tools, if you will, that people could choose to use. So, a large variety of uh, scent making material, lots of crystals, many different decks of cards, and lots of books. And so, uh, your thoughts, if you would, about kind of how we can use those, but then how they can also be like you were talking about, the person that
Mhm.
has, is adorned in crystals and not actually using them. And so I don't know if this is an appropriate use of the term. I keep hearing people use this term spiritual bypassing, and I think it can mean different things in different contexts, but I could imagine it could be here where instead of
There's some overlap.
working, I'm going to grab, a bag of rocks and hey, I should be fine now if I just carry them, that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts about how we can use some of these other elements um, productively and toward overall health?
Well, there's this joke that buying journals and writing in journals are two different hobbies.
That's great.
And I'm not, I put up my divider. So what's behind that divider is stacks of books because again, buying books and reading books are also separate. And I had a friend who I cut off. I wouldn't let her buy any more books until she read the ones she had already got. And this is something I don't talk enough or I haven't really talked much about because I'm still processing for everybody, listening at home. Um, I closed down my brick and mortar business last month. So this is a very new transition for me, a big opportunity to practice the surrender that I teach and suggest to others. So it's been a very interesting time to go through all of the emotions, figure out what my thoughts are on things. And one of the factors, because of course there were many, many factors, was that it was starting to bother me that people were leaning too much into accumulating the tools and not enough into using them.
Mm,
And that's hard to see someone who, buys 10 self-help books, but then doesn't read one. Um, and that can be problematic. So I don't remember if I've given you my pendulum sales pitch, but I would joke that, I'm not a great retail person because anytime someone would come up to a pendulum, so used for divination, I would encourage them to use their body like a pendulum. So there's some elements of muscle testing that some of you may or may not be familiar with. And so I stand both feet flat on the ground, give a little shake, and then say out loud, show me yes, see how my body moves, show me no, see how my body moves. So most of the time I'll get a slight sway forward and a slight sway back into the side. And that can be used for things like, is this the right tea for me? Yes. Um, and it's a great way to sort of test how you're feeling about things that we can outsource to pendulums, which are lovely and have crystals, and people develop all sorts of relationships with their tools. Um, and they're external. You can get pretty much the same thing from your body, which you have with you everywhere you go. Same thing with crystals, seeing people who would be distressed that they lost their crystal or they didn't have it with them or the crystal broke or all of the different things that can happen to objects. Um, and somebody very early on in my crystal journey encouraged me to spend time meditating with my crystals so that when I'm out and about, I can bring to mind where it is in the house and connect to the energy that way. And so knowing that when I've had crystals go missing, like I don't know where that piece of rose quartz is, I trust that it is where it's meant to be.
hmm.
And that's again some of that surrender, some of that acceptance, which not always easy as a human being.
Well, and this reminds me of something else that you mentioned previously, maybe not in this conversation, but in some of our conversations, um, the relationship of pain and suffering to attachment.
Hmm. Yes, pain, we can't completely avoid pain. That's just part of existence. Physical pain, emotional pain, we can do everything right and still have things go wrong, which of course we know they're unfolding as they're meant to. We just don't see it in the moment. Um, Suffering is the optional part. So after the instance of pain, do we keep humming and hawing and, oh, that's not fair. Um, and one of my meditative techniques is taking that step back and just like letting my brain sort of have that ping-pongy conversation because, there were so many feelings around needing to close my business. It was not a joyful decision. Um, and there's those elements of like, well, that's not fair. And it's all right. Tell me what you mean about that part. And letting that part sort of wind its way out. And noticing that these clenching, these grasping behaviors are creating more suffering. So it's a very different way to work with suffering when you can identify the attachment and the grasping, and then trying to invite ease, trying to invite some softening around it, just a little bit. Because asking you to immediately no more attachment, we're not there. Um, and technically, if there's no attachment and you need a new heart, I'd be like, sure, here's my heart. I'm not attached to it. We need some level of, holding on to things. So
But that sounds to me like where then relating this to the central part of this conversation with energy healing and relieving some of those blockages in the river, as the metaphor you used, and the or the analogy. I mean, so the idea that where there may be attachments, is it a fair statement that energy healing can help to loosen those things up and help that energy flow again? That
definitely.
yeah.
What can help more are the deeper teachings and self-study and practice that inner work. So I have obviously a variety of people that I work with, some who are on deep spiritual journeys of their own and do processing in between sessions. And those sessions are very different from folks who come and see me and then don't do anything. Um, and I had this was someone ages ago up in Pennsylvania, um, who would would do the same unhelpful behaviors in between sessions. And one time I arrived to facilitate a treatment, and she goes, "Well, I just have to make a quick phone call, but start clearing my energy, and I'll join you soon." And I'm like, "That's not like you have to be a participant." And so, yes, there is a softening of those attachments. Um, and that's where the system really comes into play. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, and I realized I was laughing with and somewhat at that example that you gave because I've been there, done that, not maybe to that degree, but sure, we can get lost in our stuff, right?
Totally.
So, it's which and that the other part I wanted to just touch on and then see if there was anything else you wanted to bring up and talk about again where people can learn more about your work and availability. This in addition to the physical inventory in your uh, recently closed business place, you also offered a number of classes and workshops in a variety of modalities. And in the intro, when we're reading the bio about you and your work, you talk about working with other modality practitioners. As an example of just the ones that I experienced, um, did a couple of tarot readings and then also some past life regression workshops. So how do those fit with the energy work, or is it just more along the spectrum of other experiences?
I mean, many of them are different ways to work with energy. So again, you'll have a variety of perspectives with anything, because of how humans are. Um, so we had so many different teachers, and one of my big goals was to have community, to have people who could go, all right, I'm on a healing journey. What Caitlyn offers isn't quite what I'm looking for. Oh, that's the stuff.
Uh,
Because there are so many different paths towards this truth. And we see that um, with the sheer volume of modalities and systems and teachers. And we've talked about this before, where everything has, sort of, when you get to a certain level, similar teachings. And you're
yeah,
like, all right, it's all right, this is sort of the same thing.
the
Um,
wisdom is the wisdom.
yeah. And
Yep.
it's not that people are copying each other, it's that that's what we're working towards. Just with different verbiage because we have words as humans. So it was truly delightful to get to share a space with other people who are doing, you know, the same thing but differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Neat. So they don't, so there are a variety of modalities, and I think it's, if I am hearing you correctly, one of the other things that we can do to help maybe inform and guide people that hear this conversation is that it's not a person or a modality. And
Yes.
there's really a very broad number of offerings. And now, one of the cool things about living in this time, I guess, is that they're more available now to us than they've ever been before.
Oh yeah. And
In
that's
some ways,
where
it can be overwhelming because where do you start and what do you try? But in another way, it's all there, and you can just not get attached to any of them and just
yeah.
sample and see what works.
And that's the community and resourcing we were talking about earlier, where you don't have to be a master of everything because you've got your astrology people. Um, we've all got what resonates with us. There's other Reiki practitioners in town that I partner with whose approaches are completely different. And we'll sometimes have people bounce between the two of us because they're getting different things from each of us.
Interesting. Yeah, neat.
So, yeah.
I, first of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the way, like your perspective on things and the way that you describe it, and like in such a light way, but deep at the same time. So I really appreciate that. But what I wanted to ask you, Caitlin, is what is your view on that the any dis-ease that manifests in the physical body always begins at the spiritual energetic?
That is an
What is,
interesting question.
mm,
Um, I've been sitting with my thoughts on that, um, because it's a tricky balance between empowerment and blame. I find that's where we can get a lot of, you know, toxic spirituality when somebody has a a disease or a condition and the spiritual community says, well, it's your fault, effectively. Um, I think it can be both. I personally believe that we can influence our physical body to an extent. There are some things that are there that are part of this journey. Um,
I mean, like just like a karmic dharmic kind of thing, like you're going to have that, and that's just the way it is.
it
You have
can
to
be.
like live through it. I had someone tell me once, long time ago, a spiritual teacher who said there's sometimes just, and I guess this is what part of what the Reiki clears, like spiritual sludge. And he
Mhm.
says, like, there's no, you know, you can't say anything rational about it. It's just like, oh, it's there and clear it. Something
Mhm.
like that. No explanation.
Exactly. Sometimes it is, again, that acceptance of, are you fighting against something and clenching, or are you accepting that it's part of your physical body? And that's where that conversation about what is healing can come into play. Because, Ken came to me, I'm going to throw you under the bus, Ken, sorry. Came to me for a variety of things, but never once did you come to me to say, oh, fix my eyes so I don't need glasses. That's not high on your list. There's all of these things that one person could label as, oh, this is the problem, but it's not, we have different variations on that. But we have different things like, I'm brunette. Is that meant to be healed or changed? No, I'm just brunette. So it depends on what it is. I try to be very careful with anything that can cause people to internalize shame. Um, overthinking that they've somehow deserved or earned negative things that are happening to them,
Mhm.
and encourage more ease and gentleness around that, because there are some things that are outside of our control. There can be miraculous, spontaneous healing. And so I will never say never. And my real quick, I don't know how much time we've got, but one of my favorite examples of, healing can be whatever it's meant to be. I got to practice with my friend's chicken. She called me distressed. Her chicken hadn't eaten in 3 days. The chicken wasn't walking. It was sounded like it was on its way out. So I told her ahead of time, sometimes Reiki is for transition. So I'll come over, I'll do what I can. This might be chicken hospice. We'll see how it goes. And so that's where I was really practicing what I mentioned earlier of, you know, setting aside what I think, what I want, and trusting that whatever is needed will flow. The chicken ate, did some more Reiki. The chicken stood up, pooped, and walked away and had 3 more months of happy chicken life. I have no idea to this day what happened. Um, but if I had gone into that being like, "Oh, all right, chicken, go gentle into this good night," being open to both sides of that, of what does healing look like, and yeah, anything can happen.
Thanks, Diane. And Dana would also like to ask a question piggybacking on this conversation.
Yes, so Caitlin, first of all, thank you for what you were saying about, the blaming, because I do recall that, I think back in the 90s, especially there was a lot of like, what did you do to manifest this thing?
Hmm.
And I always thought, would those same people be like at the base of the cross with Christ on the cross going, what did you do to manifest this issue? Healing people and all that. But my question is in the wisdom, and Ken can help me out with this if I don't have it all clear, but it was sort of like what Diane was saying, that something starts in a certain level, and then by the time it gets into the form, physical dense, it's almost, I guess, definitely ready to be healed because it's, coming out, but it's at the least where we would experience, oh my God, this horrible thing is happening to my body. But in another way, it might be that it's on its way out. And I wondered what you thought about that, like illnesses in different realms versus getting into the physical form. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for such a thoughtful question. Um, so a couple sort of paths from that. There can be such a thing as a healing reaction. I try to stay away from that terminology because it can scare people. Um, Sometimes things do get worse before they get better because they are passing. One of my favorite quotes on non-attachment is, "It will pass. It may pass like a kidney stone, but it will pass." Um, and that sort of reminds us that sometimes things do get worse before they get better. Um, so, yes, and attachment, grasping, and suffering can come into play as well. So, if you, to give an example, um, have a headache and go, "Oh, I have a headache. I'm going to drink some water. I'm going to lay down. And then when I get up, it'll be gone." Versus, "Oh my God, I can't believe I have a headache. What did I do to deserve this? This is the worst headache ever." And sort of go on that spiral. One of those is going to be a much worse situation than the other. And there is some element of doubling down on it, clenching. And when we do clench our physical body, it does make a lot of pain worse. So there have been some good scientific studies are a little spotty when we get into this realm. Um, like there hasn't really been a good study on Reiki. There have been quite a few studies on chronic pain and meditation in general, and being able to get into that space of acceptance of, there's a sensation in my body right now. It will change. Maybe it'll get worse, maybe it'll get better. I will be okay either way. And that's really coming back again to that weeble wobble idea of like, oh no, I'm over here right now. I know I'm going to come back here. And sometimes it's in this physical form, sometimes it's past this physical form. But everything is temporary.
The term, and I'm definitely not a practicing Buddhist, but I have read some and listened to some and have gotten an idea of some of the general concepts. And one of them is what they refer to as the second arrow. And
Mm,
much of what you've been describing tonight has reminded me of that, Caitlin, where we will have genuine experiences that can cause genuine response or reaction. Like if you put your hand on a hot stove, it's gonna hurt. But the second arrow is oh, I'm such an idiot for putting my hand on the hot stove. I saw the red light on and I still did it anyway. Or, I'm so careless or whatever it might do. And this is going to hurt forever. Oh my God, it's going to take months for this to heal. And how am I going to drive the car now or whatever it is? And all of those are the second arrow
hmm
that beyond the first arrow is, yeah, you put your hand on a hot stove. That's legit. So
Yep.
that's just something to kind of keep in mind and to work and practice toward becoming more increasingly aware of when you're inflicting that second arrow on yourself.
hmm
So
And
that's,
radical acceptance is a great tool for
yeah.
that. Tara Brach has amazing books, tools, resources, and it's that idea of yeah, it just is. Um, yeah, her RAIN
And
method is an acronym for
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the acronym is RAIN, and the person that Caitlin was referred to is Tara Brock, and definitely recommend looking into her
Yeah.
work if you're not familiar. Um, we're getting in a little long, but this has been wonderful. I guess I just wanted to also add to some thoughts from both Diane and Dina's questions that if we think of things from more of the holotropic and holographic aspects that again I don't think there's a one-way street for where uh, illness or painful things that if we have disease or we have growths or whatever physically that don't necessarily come from one place, nor do they just reside there for one specific reason in all cases. There are these feedback loops. The energy tends to pass through us so that things come to us maybe from our metaphysical places. We experience them in the physical, and then that experience is fed back so that there's a learning and a growing at all levels. And it is also going out into the holographic universe. So others are then receiving some of that learning and growth as well. And so part of where our experiences may actually be there to lend to the general universal knowledge base so that the new experience, the new way of dealing with things can be there. Frankly, that's part of the reason we like to offer this program so that it may be one more thread of information into the tapestry. Anyway, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you thought you wanted to make sure that we would speak about tonight? Anything that came to you or that you want to make sure that we did talk about that we haven't?
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground. I've referenced meditation quite a few times, and so I wanted to give a plug to Insight Timer is a meditation app, and I have quite a lot of free content on there. So if you enjoyed especially the opening meditation, I hope that you'll find me on Insight Timer and meditate with me there. So I really love to share these tools with folks. And it's been interesting getting to live this transition and figure out what does it look like to rediscover that alignment of sharing things in an authentic way. And so as I figure that out, it'll be updated on my website, social media, all of that good stuff. But I very much enjoyed being on the program tonight with you, Ken.
Caitlyn Adams, thank you again for everything. the last several years, and this evening is just another great part of our journey together. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks to
Ken.
everyone that joined us this evening.